The day my daughter Becca told me my quilting was just a hobby for old ladies was the same day I received the email from Dr. Thomas Chen at the Berkshire Textile Museum. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating the tears that had started to form in my eyes. My phone displayed Becca's text. "Mom, please be realistic about your retirement. This quilting obsession isn't sustainable. It's time to think about selling the house." And right below it, my laptop screen glowed with Dr. Chen's message. "Your work represents one of the most significant folk art discoveries of the decade. We would be honored to feature your collection in our upcoming exhibition." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't tell Becca about the email. After 40 years of putting my daughter first, through every triumph and heartbreak, I finally realized it was time to stitch together a future of my own. What happened next would unravel the fabric of our relationship in ways I never imagined. My fingers have always spoken a language my voice couldn't. They've told stories through fabric since I was 8 years old, learning at my grandmother's side in our small Oak Ridge home. She taught me that quilts weren't just blankets, they were history books made of cloth, family albums sewn with thread instead of bound with glue. "Every stitch carries your intention, Ellie," she'd say, guiding my small hands. "When you give someone a quilt, you're giving them pieces of your heart." Those words stayed with me through the darkest and brightest moments of my life. When I met Will Parker during my sophomore year of college, I quilted him a lap blanket for his drafty dormitory room. When we married 3 years later, I stitched our wedding quilt by hand, incorporating scraps from both our families' histories, a piece of his father's military uniform, a square from my mother's kitchen apron. When Becca was born after 5 years of painful fertility treatments, I channeled my overwhelming joy into creating her baby quilt. Little did I know then that this tiny bundle wrapped in my handmade comfort would someday look at my life's passion and see nothing but wasted time. Will and I settled in Oak Ridge, Massachusetts, a small town nestled in the foothills of the Berkshires. He taught history at the local high school while I worked part-time at the library, arranging my schedule around Becca's needs. Every spare moment went into raising our daughter or into my quilting, often combining both as I'd stitch while helping with homework or waiting at dance rehearsals. When Becca showed promise in science and mathematics, Will and I made the decision to redirect our modest savings toward her education. We wanted to give her advantages we never had. My quilting space, once a corner of our bedroom, expanded slightly into the sunroom when Will converted it for me as a 20th anniversary gift. But I remained frugal with my supplies, often repurposing fabrics or buying remnants from clearance bins. "You could sell these, you know," Will would say, holding up one of my finished pieces. "These aren't just quilts, Ellie. They're art." I'd smile and shake my head. "They're memories, Will. You can't put a price on that." The truth was, I didn't. Quilt for recognition or money? I quilted to process life, its joys and sorrows, its patterns and disruptions. When Will was diagnosed with lymphoma during Becca's senior year of high school, my quilting took on a feverish pace. I stitched while sitting beside his hospital bed, the rhythmic movement of needle through fabric keeping me anchored as our world tilted sideways. "Promise me you'll keep quilting after I'm gone," Will whispered during one of his more lucid moments, his fingers tracing the pattern I was working on. "It's who you are, Ellie." I nodded, unable to speak through my tears. 3 months later, I wrapped myself in the quilt I'd been making during his hospital stays. Now finished, but missing its intended recipient. Becca left for college 2 weeks after her father's funeral. I understood her need to escape the house filled with memories, but her departure left a silence that felt like another death. I filled that silence with the soft whisper of thread, through fabric, creating a quilt from Will's old flannel shirts, his concert t-shirts, even the ridiculous holiday sweater I'd tried to throw away every year. Through Becca's undergraduate years, I maintained our family home while working full-time at the library to help with expenses not covered by scholarships. Will's life insurance policy had paid off our mortgage and provided some security, but college costs mounted quickly. When Becca was accepted to medical school, I never hesitated before offering to help. "Mom, are you sure?" she asked, sitting at our kitchen table during a rare visit home. "It's so expensive, and I know Dad's insurance money isn't infinite." "Your father and I always wanted this for you," I said, passing her a slice of apple pie. "We've planned for it. Don't worry about me." What I didn't tell her was that I'd taken on additional hours cataloging special collections, often working late into the evening, or that I'd started selling preserves at the farmer's market to supplement my income, or that I'd converted half my quilting space back into a vegetable starting area to reduce our grocery bills. The sacrifices were worth it when Becca graduated with her medical degree. I sat in the audience bursting with pride, a small quilt, hidden in my bag. A surprise graduation gift incorporating fabric from her childhood achievements. A square from her science camp t-shirt. A piece of the dress she wore to her first school dance. A scrap from the lab coat she'd worn in her undergraduate research position. Her reaction when I presented it wasn't what I'd hoped for. "Mom, you didn't need to make this," she said, her voice tinged with what sounded like embarrassment as her new friends, sophisticated, urbane medical graduates, looked on. "Really, it's quaint." Quaint. The word stabbed deeper than she knew. But I smiled and tucked the quilt back into its wrapping. "Just something to keep at the foot of your bed in your new apartment," I said lightly, "for when you get homesick." I later discovered she'd stored it in the back of her closet, still in its wrapping. 2 months after graduation, Becca delivered another shock. She wasn't going into medical practice after all. She'd accepted a high-paying position in pharmaceutical marketing in Boston. "It's still healthcare, Mom," she explained over the phone, "and the salary is almost double what I'd make as a resident. Plus, I've met someone. His name is James. He's in finance, and he thinks this is a smart move." I swallowed my disappointment. All those years of sacrifice to put her through medical school, and she was abandoning medicine before seeing a single patient. But it was her life, her choice. I told her I supported her decision and asked when I might meet this James person. Their whirlwind romance led to an engagement 6 months later and a lavish Boston wedding that I could barely afford to contribute to, though I insisted on paying my traditional share as mother of the bride. Becca and James had definite ideas about what constituted an appropriate celebration, and my offer to make quilted table runners for the reception tables was politely but firmly declined. "The venue has a specific aesthetic, Mom," Becca explained. "We're going for something more contemporary." I nodded and wrote another check I couldn't really afford. The week after the wedding, I sold my car and started walking to work. The years that followed brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Becca and James built a life in Boston that seemed increasingly distant from my quiet existence in Oak Ridge. Their visits became less frequent, our phone calls shorter. When they did visit, Becca would look around my home with barely concealed disapproval. "Mom, why do you keep so much fabric?" she asked during one Christmas day. "This house is becoming a fire hazard." What she saw as clutter, I recognized as potential. Each bolt of fabric, each carefully sorted scrap bin represented future creations, stories yet to be told. But I didn't know how to make her understand that. The distance between us grew wider after the birth of my granddaughter Zoe. I'd hoped a child might soften Becca, reconnect her with the warmth and intimacy of our own mother-daughter relationship. I spent weeks creating a spectacular crib quilt for Zoe, incorporating techniques I'd been perfecting for years, intricate applique work, hand-quilted constellations that would glow faintly in the dark thanks to specialized thread. When I presented it during my first visit to meet my new granddaughter, Becca sighed. "Mom, we already bought a designer bedding set that matches the nursery theme," she said, barely looking at the quilt I'd poured my heart into. And honestly, all these loose threads probably aren't safe for a baby. I bit my tongue, folded the quilt, and put it away. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I crept into the nursery and ran my fingers over the store-bought crib set with its perfectly coordinated colors and machine-embroidered details. It was beautiful in its way, but contained no history, no meaning, no love stitched into its fibers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Zoe grew, I tried to maintain a connection through regular visits, though they always left me feeling like an outsider in their sleek, minimalist townhouse, where nothing was out of place and everything matched. I started sending small quilted gifts for Zoe instead. A tiny doll with a collection of miniature quilts, a fabric book with textured pages, a growth chart with playful applique animals marking the heights. I wasn't sure if Zoe ever received them until one visit when she was about 7, and she whispered to me while Becca was taking a work call. "Grandma, I love the doll quilts you made. I sleep with them under my pillow so they don't get taken away." My heart broke and soared simultaneously. At least one person in that house understood what I was trying to give. Throughout these years, my quilting evolved. The sunroom studio became my sanctuary, the place where I processed my emotions about my changing relationship with my daughter, my grief over Will, my joy in my granddaughter. I experimented with techniques learned from quilting books borrowed from the library where I worked, Amish-inspired geometric designs, intricate Baltimore album blocks, Japanese sashiko stitching. I joined a small quilting circle that met at Patchwork Dreams, the local fabric shop owned by my friend Sophia Martinez. These Tuesday night gatherings became the highlight of my week. 6 women ranging in age from 30 to 80, sharing techniques, stories, and support over cups of tea and the soft rustle of fabric. "Ellie, this is museum-quality work," Sophia said one evening as I unfolded my latest project, a quilt depicting the changing seasons in Oak Ridge, from the deep blues and whites of winter to the explosion of color in summer. I laughed. "I think you're required to say that as the only fabric shop owner in town." But something in her expression made me pause. She wasn't just being kind. She genuinely admired my work. "I'm serious," she continued. "You've developed a style that's completely unique. These aren't just pretty patterns. They tell stories. They preserve history." The other women murmured in agreement, and for the first time, I allowed myself to see my quilts through their eyes, not as homey crafts, but as something more significant. That night, I stayed up late in my studio, looking at the pieces I'd created over the decades, seeing the progression from simple utilitarian blankets to complex artistic expressions. When the COVID pandemic hit, the library closed temporarily, and I found myself with unexpected time on my hands. Rather than worry about the state of the world, I channeled my energy into an ambitious project I'd been contemplating for years, a series of 12 interconnected quilts that would tell the story of my family's Pennsylvania Dutch heritage, incorporating traditional patterns but reimagining them through contemporary techniques and materials. I worked methodically, losing myself for hours in the meditative process. Without the interruption of my regular work schedule, I found a creative rhythm I hadn't experienced since before Becca was born. I called this collection Threads of Memory and poured into it everything I knew about textile art and family history. As the world slowly reopened, Sophia convinced me to allow 3 of the completed quilts to be displayed in her shop window. I agreed reluctantly, more to help drive business to her struggling store than out of any desire for recognition. I didn't even let her put my full name on the display, just handcrafted by EP. A week later, she called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Ellie, you need to come to the shop right now. There's someone here you have to meet." That someone turned out to be Dr. Thomas Chen, curator of textile arts at the Berkshire Textile Museum, who had been driving through Oak Ridge on his way to evaluate a collection in Vermont when the vibrant colors in Sophia's window display caught his eye. "Mrs. Parker," he said, extending his hand formally, "your work shows extraordinary technical skill combined with a distinctive artistic vision. Are there more pieces in this series?" I nodded, suddenly shy. 9 more. They're part of a cohesive collection I'm calling Threads of Memory. "I would very much like to see them," he said. 2 days later, Dr. Chen sat in my sunroom studio, carefully examining each quilt in the collection, taking photographs and making notes. He asked questions about my techniques, my inspiration, my background. No one had ever taken such a serious interest in my work before, and I found myself opening up, explaining the stories behind each piece, the family histories they preserved. "Mrs. Parker," he said finally, "what you've created here is significant. Your work bridges traditional American folk art practices with contemporary textile innovations in a way I've rarely encountered. The Berkshire Textile Museum would be honored to feature your collection in our upcoming exhibition on American women textile artists." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "My quilts? In a museum?" He smiled. "Not just in the exhibition. We would like to make your collection the centerpiece, with your permission, of course." I sank into my sewing chair, overwhelmed. "I never thought of myself as an artist," I said softly. "It was just something I did because I couldn't help it." "That," Dr. Chen replied, "is precisely the definition of a true artist." In the weeks that followed, I signed contracts, provided artist statements, and worked with the museum staff on how my quilts would be displayed. They even commissioned professional photographs of me in my studio for the exhibition catalog. The excitement I felt was tempered only by one thought. What would Becca say? I hadn't told her about any of this. Our conversations had grown increasingly strained over the previous months. Her calls mostly consisted of gentle but persistent suggestions that I should consider downsizing or moving to Pinewood Acres, the assisted living community at the edge of town. "Mom, you're not getting any younger," she'd say, her tone practical. "That house is too big for one person to maintain, and your quilting has taken over every room. It's becoming hoarding, and I'm concerned." I wanted to tell her about the museum exhibition, about Dr. Chen's praise, about the validation that my life's work wasn't just a hobby but something worthy of preservation and study. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the fear that even this wouldn't change how she saw me, as an aging woman with an outdated hobby who needed to be managed. So I kept the news to myself, continuing my preparations for the exhibition while fielding Becca's increasingly direct suggestions about my future. I sensed the conversation was building toward something, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was early spring, the daffodils just beginning to emerge in my garden, when Becca called to announce she and James would be visiting that weekend, without Zoe, who would be staying with James's parents. "We need to talk about some things, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that determined efficiency I'd come to dread. "I've done some research about Pinewood Acres, and they currently have an opening in their independent living section. James and I think it would be perfect for you." Perfect for me, or perfect for them? I wondered, but kept the thought to myself. "I'm looking forward to seeing you," I said instead. The weekend arrived with a sense of impending confrontation. Becca and James pulled up in their luxury SUV, bringing with them brochures, financial projections, and a timeline for what they called my transition to the next phase. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Will and I had helped, Becca with her homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where I'd written the check for her first semester of medical school. Now it held glossy pamphlets showing smiling seniors playing bingo and eating in communal dining rooms. "The 2-bedroom unit would give you space for a small sewing area," Becca explained, pointing to a floor plan. "You'd have to downsize your Fabric collection, of course, but that's probably overdue anyway. I looked at the diagram of the apartment. The so-called second bedroom was barely larger than a walk-in closet. My current studio held 7 large bookcases of fabric, 3 sewing machines, including Will's grandmother's treadle singer, a design wall, and a large cutting table Will had built me for our 30th anniversary. And the timing is perfect, James added, his financial analyst's mind always looking for efficiency. The real estate market is strong right now. If we list this house next month, we should be able to close before the Pinewood unit becomes unavailable. We? I asked quietly. I've already spoken with a real estate agent, Becca continued, not hearing the edge in my question. She thinks, with some decluttering and minor updates, we could get enough to cover your Pinewood entry fee with plenty left for your future care needs. I stirred my tea slowly, trying to process what was happening. My daughter and son-in-law were planning to sell my home, the home where she'd grown up, where I'd built my life with Will, where I'd created my art. And they were doing it without even asking if this was what I wanted. Becca, I said finally, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to leave my home. She exchanged a glance with James. Mom, this isn't just about what you want. It's about what's practical. This house is too big for you. Your quilting has taken over every room. Honestly, it's becoming a health hazard. My quilting keeps me mentally and physically active, I countered. The doctors say my dexterity and eyesight are excellent for my age, specifically because of the detailed handwork I do. James leaned forward, adopting what I imagined was his client consultation posture. Eleanor, we understand that your quilting is important to you as a hobby, but you need to be realistic about your future. You're 62. You need to think about retirement security, not fabric collections. A hobby. There it was again. The dismissal of my life's work, my passion, my art as nothing more than a pastime for a bored old woman. Becca must have seen something change in my expression because her tone softened slightly. Mom, we're just trying to help. You've always put everyone else first. Now it's time to be practical about your own needs. My needs? I repeated, the words catching in my throat. And what do you know about my needs, Becca? When was the last time you asked me what I want instead of telling me what I should do? Her expression hardened. We're trying to have a rational conversation about your future, and you're getting emotional. This is exactly why we need to make these decisions now, while you're still able to participate in the process. While I'm still able, the implication was clear. She saw me as declining, as less capable, as needing management. I put you through medical school, I said quietly. Becca blinked, thrown by the apparent non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything? I'm just remembering all the sacrifices your father and I made for your future. We never questioned your dreams. We supported you every step of the way, even when you decided not to become a doctor after all. We respected your choices. That was different, she insisted. My career change was a strategic decision based on market realities and income potential. I nodded slowly. And my decision to stay in my home is based on my reality and my potential. As a quilter, as an artist, as a person with agency over my own life. Mom, Becca said, her patience visibly fraying. Your quilting is a hobby, not a career. It's lovely that you enjoy it, but let's be realistic. It's just a pastime for old ladies. It's not going to pay your bills or secure your future. Her words struck like a physical blow. Just a pastime for old ladies. 40 years of dedication, of developing my craft, of pouring my soul into fabric and thread, reduced to a stereotype. I stood up slowly, walked to my desk, and retrieved the elegant exhibition catalog the museum had sent me the previous week. Without a word, I placed it on the table in front of Becca and James. What's this? Becca asked, frowning as she picked it up. The answer to your concerns about my future, I replied. The glossy exhibition catalog landed between us like a gauntlet thrown. Becca stared at the cover, a professional photograph of my Four Seasons in Oak Ridge quilt, dramatically lit to highlight the dimensional texture of the stitching. Above the image, elegant typography announced, "Threads of Memory, the textile art of Eleanor Parker." "What is this?" Becca repeated, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Open it," I said quietly. James reached for the catalog first, flipping it, open with the casual confidence of someone used to assessing documents. His eyebrows rose as he scanned the first page. The Berkshire Textile Museum proudly presents the first major exhibition of Eleanor Parker's groundbreaking fiber art, he read aloud, his financial analyst's voice faltering over words like masterwork and significant cultural contribution. Becca snatched the catalog from his hands, her eyes widening as she turned the pages. There were my quilts, photographed by professionals against neutral backgrounds that emphasized their colors and textures. There I was in my studio, needle in hand, looking focused and dignified. And there was Dr. Chen's scholarly essay analyzing my techniques and artistic significance. "I don't understand," Becca said finally. "When did this happen? How did this happen?" "The exhibition opens next month," I explained calmly. Dr. Chen, the museum's textile curator, discovered my work at Sophia's shop and approached me about featuring my quilts. They're making my Threads of Memory collection the centerpiece of their American Women Textile Artists exhibition. James leaned forward, his expression shifting from dismissive to calculating. "Is there money in this? Some kind of payment for the exhibition?" Of course that would be his first question. Not congratulations, not pride, but profit potential. "The museum is purchasing 2 pieces for their permanent collection," I said. "And they've commissioned me to create a special piece for their bicentennial next year." Becca was still flipping through the catalog, her face a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "But these are just your quilts, the ones you make here in the sunroom." "Just my quilts," I repeated softly. "Just the art I've been creating for 40 years while you grew up, went to school, built your career. Just the work that museums now consider worthy of study and preservation." James, ever practical, was already recalculating. "So what are we talking about in terms of valuation? These museum purchases, are they significant?" I met his gaze steadily. "The museum paid $35,000 for each of the 2 quilts they acquired." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to hold its ticking for a moment. $70,000? Becca whispered finally. "For quilts?" "For artwork," I corrected gently. "And the commission for next year's piece is another $40,000. James was already reaching for his phone, no doubt ready to recalculate whatever spreadsheet he'd prepared for my future care needs. Becca just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, a note of accusation in her voice. The question pulled something loose inside me. A thread that, once tugged, began to unravel years of carefully contained hurt and disappointment. "When would I have told you, Becca? During one of your 5-minute phone calls while you multitasked with something else? During your brief visits when all you did was criticize my clutter? Or perhaps when you were planning to sell my home without asking me?" My voice remained steady, but I felt a trembling begin deep inside. Years of putting everyone else first, of swallowing my own needs and desires, of making myself small to make room for others. It was all rising to the surface now. "That's not fair," Becca protested. "We've been trying to help you plan for retirement. We're concerned about your future." "No," I said firmly. "You've been planning my future. There's a difference. You never once asked what I wanted. You never once considered that I might have plans, dreams, ambitions of my own." James cleared his throat, his analytical mind already adapting to this new data. Eleanor, this is wonderful news about your art. It changes the financial picture significantly. Perhaps we could revise our strategy for— There is no our strategy, I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. This is my life, my home, my career. I don't need or want either of you to manage me. Becca's face flushed. Mom, you're being unreasonable. We're your family. We're just trying to look out for you. Are you? I asked. Or are you trying to solve what you see as the problem of your aging mother in the most convenient way for yourselves? The hurt that flashed across her face almost made me take back the words. Almost. That's not fair, she repeated, but her voice had lost its certainty. Isn't it? I pressed on. You've never shown any interest in my quilting. You've dismissed it as a hobby, as clutter, as something taking up space. You've never asked about what it means to me or why I do it. You just want me to downsize it away, pack it into a closet-sized room at Pinewood, and fade quietly into a convenient old age. James stood up abruptly. I think we all need to take a step back here. This is becoming emotionally charged, and we need to approach this rationally. Emotions aren't rational, James, I said. Neither is art, neither is family, and neither is the way you and Becca have been treating me. Becca's eyes filled with tears, whether of frustration or genuine hurt, I couldn't tell. We were trying to help, she insisted. Dad would have wanted us to make sure you were taken care of. The mention of Will sent a jolt through me. Your father? I said quietly. Always respected my quilting. He built me this studio. He encouraged me to develop my skills. He saw my work as valuable long before any museum did. Don't presume to tell me what Will would have wanted. Becca pushed back her chair and stood, her professional composure cracking. Fine. Since you clearly have everything figured out, we'll just go. Enjoy your museum exhibition. I hope your quilts keep you warm at night. The petty cruelty of her parting shot hung in the air between us. For a moment, I saw the little girl who would slam her bedroom door when she didn't get her way. The teenager who would weaponize silence when disappointed. But this wasn't a child's tantrum. This was a grown woman refusing to see her mother as a whole person. They do, I said simply. They always have. James, ever the peacemaker when it served his purposes, tried to salvage the situation. Let's all take some time to process this new information. Eleanor, congratulations on your artistic success. Becca, perhaps we should head back to Boston and continue this conversation another time. Becca was already gathering her things, shoving the Pinewood Acres brochures back into her designer tote bag. There's nothing more to discuss. Mom has made it clear she doesn't want our help or input. I don't want to be managed, I clarified. There's a difference. She paused at the door, her back to me. We were trying to do what's best for you. No, I said gently. You were trying to do what's easiest for you. There's a difference there, too. After they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, running my fingers over the exhibition catalog. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence heavier. Had I been too harsh? Too direct? Perhaps. But after decades of accommodation, of making myself smaller to make room for others, the truth had finally erupted with the force of long suppression. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it out to my studio. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, illuminating the in-progress quilt on my design wall, a complex composition inspired by the changing light on the Berkshire Hills through the seasons. Dr. Chen had specifically requested this piece for the exhibition, calling my use of color revelatory and my technical innovations worthy of scholarly attention. My phone rang repeatedly that evening, my sister Amy, calling no doubt after hearing from Becca. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to defend myself again, to explain why I had finally stood up for my own worth. Amy's message confirmed my suspicion. Ellie, what on earth happened? Becca called me crying. Something about you rejecting their help and having some quilts in a museum? Call me back, please. I set the phone aside without returning the call. Instead, I sat at my sewing machine and lost myself in the rhythm of piecing fabric, in the meditative flow of creation that had sustained me through my hardest days. Tomorrow would be time enough for explanations. Tomorrow came with a text from Amy. On my way over, this needs to be discussed in person. Amy had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed ruffled feathers and brokered compromises. 5 years younger than me, she had always had an easier relationship with Becca, playing the fun aunt role while I handled the difficult work of actual parenting. She arrived mid-morning, letting herself in with the spare key she'd had since Will's illness. I was in my studio, pressing a newly pieced section of my current project. Ellie, she said from the doorway, we need to talk. I set the iron in its rest and turned to face her. I assume Becca has given you her version of events? Amy sighed, stepping into the studio and looking around with new interest, as if seeing it for the first time. She said you rejected their help with retirement planning and were hostile about their suggestions. I couldn't help but laugh. Is that what we're calling it? Retirement planning? They were trying to move me into Pinewood Acres and sell my house without even asking. If that's what I wanted. Amy's eyes widened. Sell the house? Becca didn't mention that part. I'm not surprised. I picked up the exhibition catalog from my work table and handed it to her. This is what triggered everything. Amy flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement. Ellie, this is incredible. A museum exhibition? Why didn't you tell me? The question held genuine hurt, not accusation. Unlike Becca, Amy had always shown at least polite interest in my quilting, though she'd never really understood it. I didn't tell anyone, I admitted. At first, it seemed too improbable to be real. Then, as it became certain, I found myself wanting to keep it private, to protect it from dismissal or diminishment. Amy sank onto my sewing chair, still paging, through the catalog. I had no idea your work was this significant. I mean, I knew you were talented, but this is different. This is recognition. That's the point Becca and James missed entirely, I said, sitting across from her on the small love seat where I sometimes rested between long quilting sessions. They see my quilting as a hobby that's taking up space, not as a legitimate artistic pursuit worthy of respect. Amy looked up, her expression thoughtful. But why didn't you correct them sooner? Why let them believe it was just a hobby if it's actually your career? The question struck at something fundamental, something I was only now beginning to acknowledge to myself. Because I believed them, I said quietly. Or part of me did. I've spent so many years minimizing my own work, calling it just quilting, or just something I do to keep busy. I absorbed the cultural narrative that women's traditional fiber arts aren't real art, but crafts or hobbies. It took an outside expert, Dr. Chen, to make me see my own work clearly. Amy set the catalog aside and reached for my hand. I'm sorry I never really understood what your quilting meant to you. I should have paid more attention. Her simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that. So what happens now? She asked. With Becca, I mean. I sighed, the weight of decades of mother-daughter complexity settling between us. I don't know. She left angry, feeling rejected. But Amy, I can't keep diminishing myself to make her comfortable. I can't pretend my art doesn't matter to preserve her image of me as a mother who only exists to support her. But you don't have to choose between being an artist and being her mother, Amy pointed out. No, but Becca might have to choose between seeing me as I actually am and continuing to see me as she wants me to be. And that's her work to do, not mine. Amy nodded slowly. She called me this morning, before I came over. She wanted Me to talk some sense into you about Pinewood. Even after seeing the exhibition catalog, even after learning about the museum purchases, she said, and I'm quoting here, "One lucky break doesn't change the financial realities of aging." Amy grimaced. I told her I needed to hear your side before forming an opinion. The clinical dismissal of my life's work as one lucky break stung, but it no longer had the power to diminish me. And what do you think now that you've heard my side? Amy looked around the studio, at the carefully organized fabric shelves, the design wall with its in-progress piece, the sewing machine Will had given me for our 25th anniversary, the cutting table that doubled as a photography station for documenting my work. I think, she said slowly, that I've been as blind as Becca. This isn't a hobby taking over your house. This is a professional studio for a recognized artist. And I think Becca's going to have a very hard time adjusting to that reality. That's her journey, I said, finding strength in the simple truth. I've spent my whole life trying to make things easier for her. I can't do that anymore, not at the expense of my own dignity. Amy squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I think Will would be incredibly proud of you right now, both of your art and of your standing up for yourself. The mention of Will brought a different kind of ache. He always believed in my work, even when I didn't. He's the one who insisted I sign and date every quilt, who documented my early pieces, who kept telling me I was creating something important. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the presence of Will's absence a familiar companion between sisters who had both loved him. So when is this exhibition? Amy asked finally. I want to be there. The opening is May 15th. Dr. Chen has arranged for my transportation and accommodation. They're treating me like a visiting dignitary. I smiled at the thought, still slightly disbelieving. As they should, Amy said firmly. And I'll be there, front and center, being insufferably proud of my big sister, the famous artist. After Amy left, promising to give me space with Becca rather than playing intermediary, I returned to my sewing. The confrontation with Becca, and James, followed by the more supportive but still emotional conversation with Amy, had left me drained. Quilting had always been my way of processing complex emotions, of finding order amid chaos, of creating beauty from fragments. Today was no different. As I pieced together the complex pattern of my current project, I thought about the fragments of my relationship with Becca, wondering if they could ever be reassembled into something whole again. Unlike fabric, which submits to the needle and thread, human relationships can't be forced into new configurations. They require mutual willingness, mutual respect. The next week passed in a strange limbo. Becca didn't call or text, her silence a familiar punishment from childhood magnified by adult distance. I continued my preparations for the exhibition, working with Dr. Chen on final selections and display arrangements. The museum had hired a professional photographer to document my creative process for an accompanying video installation, and my quiet studio was temporarily transformed by lighting equipment and camera gear. Mrs. Parker, could you explain your unique approach to color theory? The young filmmaker asked, adjusting her camera as I sorted fabric scraps into a complex gradient. I think of color as emotion made visible, I explained, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motion of auditioning fabric combinations. Each shade carries its own energy, its own emotional resonance. When I'm designing a quilt, I'm orchestrating those energies into conversation with each other. The filmmaker nodded eagerly. That's fascinating. And do you plan your color schemes in advance, or is it intuitive? I smiled, appreciating her genuine interest. Both. I start with careful planning, color wheels, value studies, contrast analysis. But then I allow intuition to guide the final selections. The fabric itself often tells me where it belongs. As we continued filming, I found myself articulating aspects of my creative process I'd never put into words before. The young woman's thoughtful questions drew out reflections on techniques I'd developed over decades, on the evolution of my artistic voice, on the intersection of tradition and innovation in my work. "You speak about quilting with such clarity and depth," she remarked during a break. "Have you ever considered teaching or writing about your methods?" The question caught me by surprise. "No, I've always just done the work. I never thought about formalizing my knowledge." "You should," she said confidently. "There would definitely be an audience for it. Your approach is unique." Her words planted a seed, a possibility I'd never considered. Teaching, writing, sharing not just the finished quilts but the process, the philosophy behind them. For the first time, I began to imagine a future beyond my solitary studio practice, a way to extend my artistic legacy beyond the physical objects I created. The idea was still percolating when I received a text from Sophia at Patchwork Dreams. "You're in the Boston Globe, front page of the art section, coming over with copies right now." 30 minutes later, Sophia burst through my front door waving several copies of the newspaper. "Look at this," she exclaimed, spreading the paper on my kitchen table. There it was, a large color photograph of me in my studio, needle in hand, surrounded by vibrant fabric, with the headline, "From Domestic Craft to Fine Art, Eleanor Parker's Quilts Challenge Traditional Boundaries." The article was substantial, thoughtful, respectful. The journalist had interviewed Dr. Chen about the significance of my work in the context of American textile arts. There were quotes from other fiber artists and museum curators discussing the growing recognition of quilting as a legitimate art form. And there was a sidebar about the upcoming exhibition, including dates, location, and admission information. "This is huge, Ellie," Sophia said, her eyes shining. "You're going to have people from all over coming to see your work." I scanned the article again, still processing the surreal experience of seeing my name and work discussed with such seriousness in a major newspaper. "I can hardly believe this is happening," I admitted. "Believe it," Sophia insisted. "Your work deserves this recognition. It's been a long time coming." As Sophia and I celebrated with tea and leftover apple cake, my phone chimed with a text. Notification. It was from an unfamiliar number. "Grandma, it's Zoe. Mom doesn't know I'm texting you. I saw your picture in the newspaper at school. My art teacher showed everyone. She says you're amazing. I miss you." My heart constricted. In the turmoil with Becca, I'd hardly had time to think about how it was affecting Zoe. I texted back carefully. "I miss you too, sweetheart. Thank you for reaching out. Are you doing okay?" The reply came quickly. "I'm fine. Mom seems sad but won't talk about it. Are you still my grandma even if you and Mom are fighting?" The innocent question brought tears to my eyes. "Always and forever," I wrote back. "Nothing could ever change that." "Good," came the reply. "My friend's parents got divorced and she still sees her dad, so I thought maybe it was like that. Can I come to your museum show?" Before I could reply, a rapid succession of texts appeared. "Mom just came in. Gotta go. Love you." And then, a moment later, "Please don't tell her I texted you. I'm not supposed to." I set the phone down, my celebration with Sophia now tinged with sadness. My granddaughter was being caught in the middle of adult conflicts. She couldn't possibly understand. Becca's silence wasn't just punishing me. It was forcing a wedge between me and Zoe. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked, noting my changed expression. "Just complications," I said vaguely. "Family stuff." Sophia, who had known me since we both joined the Oak Ridge PTA when our children were in elementary school, gave me a knowing look. "Becca's still not speaking to you?" I sighed. "No. And now she's keeping Zoe from contacting me too." Sophia's expression darkened. "That's not right, Ellie. Using a child as a pawn in adult disagreements never is." "I know," I agreed. but confronting her about it would only make things worse for Zoe. We sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before Sophia spoke again. You know, this exhibition might be the opportunity to heal things with Becca. Once she sees how your work is being received, how respected you are in this field, she might finally understand. I wanted to believe she was right, but decades of experience with my daughter's stubborn pride made me doubtful. Maybe, I said, but I'm not counting on it. The next morning brought another unexpected development. My doorbell rang just after 10, and I opened it to find Amelia Harrison, my younger sister Amy, standing there with a tall, distinguished-looking man I didn't recognize. "Ellie," Amy said, her expression unusually serious. "This is Martin Friedman. He's my attorney." I blinked in confusion. "Your attorney? Amy, what's going on?" Amy pushed past me into the house, the attorney following with an apologetic smile. "We need to talk. It's about Becca." A cold knot formed in my stomach as I closed the door behind them. "Has something happened? Is she all right?" "She's fine," Amy assured me quickly. "Physically, at least. But Martin needs to tell you something, and I wanted to be here when he did." We settled in the living room, the formal setting suddenly appropriate for what was clearly official business. Martin Friedman opened his briefcase and extracted a folder. "Mrs. Parker," he began, "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but when Ms. Harrison explained the situation, I felt it was important to address this matter quickly. It has come to our attention that your daughter, Rebecca Walsh, has been making inquiries about the legal requirements for establishing conservatorship over an elderly parent." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. "Conservatorship?" I repeated, the term familiar from heart-wrenching celebrity cases in the news. "Becca is trying to take legal control over me?" "She has only made preliminary inquiries at this point," Martin clarified. "There has been no filing, but Ms. Harrison was concerned enough to consult me professionally, and I agree that preemptive action is warranted." Amy reached for my hand. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. James's cousin works at the law firm where Becca was asking questions, and he mentioned it to their aunt, who told me. I couldn't not tell you." I felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. My own daughter was exploring legal means to override my autonomy, to take control of my decisions, my home, my life. The betrayal cut deeper than any previous disappointment. "On what possible grounds?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Martin consulted his notes. "The inquiries centered around cognitive decline and financial mismanagement as potential justifications. However," he added quickly, seeing my expression, "the bar for establishing conservatorship is quite high. An adult with decision-making capacity cannot be placed under conservatorship simply because family members disagree with their choices." "She thinks I'm losing my mind because I won't move into Pinewood Acres," I said flatly. "She thinks my quilting is evidence of hoarding or irrational behavior." Amy squeezed my hand. "Ellie, that's why I brought Martin. We need to establish clearly, legally, that you are fully competent and in control of your faculties and finances. We need to create a paper trail that would make any conservatorship attempt dead on arrival." Martin nodded. "I would recommend a geriatric assessment by an independent physician to document your cognitive status. I would also suggest financial documentation, recent tax returns, bank statements, evidence of responsible money management. And it would be prudent to update your will and advance directives to make your wishes explicitly clear." I nodded mechanically, still processing the enormity of Becca's betrayal. My own child, seeking legal means to control me as if I were an incompetent child myself. The irony was bitter. "I'll do whatever is necessary," I said, "but I can't believe it's come to this." Amy's expression was a mixture of anger and sadness. "I confronted Becca when I found out. She tried to justify it by saying she was exploring all options to protect you from yourself. I told her she was crossing a line that might permanently damage your relationship. And what did she say to that? I asked, dreading the answer. Amy hesitated. She said sometimes a parent's welfare has to come before their relationship, that you'd thank her eventually when you were safe at Pinewood instead of, her words, not mine, buried under a collapsing pile of fabric scraps. And the revelation about Becca's conservatorship inquiries changed something fundamental within me. The hurt was profound, but underneath it grew a steely determination I hadn't felt since the early days after Will's death, when I'd had to reinvent my life as a widow. I need to protect myself, I told Martin Friedman, straightening my shoulders. What do we do first? Over the next 2 weeks, I underwent a comprehensive geriatric assessment with an independent specialist recommended by Martin. The doctor conducted extensive cognitive testing, reviewing my medical history and current health status. His conclusion was unequivocal. I was functioning at an exceptionally high cognitive level for someone of any age, showing no signs of impairment or decline. To be frank, Mrs. Parker, he told me as we concluded our final session, I wish all my patients had your mental acuity and problem-solving abilities. Your work as a textile artist has clearly kept your brain active and engaged in complex ways. The validation was bittersweet. It should never have been necessary to prove my competence, but here we were. Next came the financial documentation. My accountant compiled a comprehensive overview of my financial status, including documentation of the museum purchases, the commissioned work, and my prudent management of Will's life insurance proceeds, and my modest retirement savings. Far from the financially precarious elderly woman Becca had portrayed, the documentation showed a woman of moderate but stable means who had consistently lived within her income and made sound financial decisions. This paperwork alone would make any conservatorship filing extremely difficult to pursue, Martin assured me when we met to review the documents, but I recommend we take additional steps to solidify your position. Those steps included updating my will and advance directives with crystal clear language about my wishes, establishing a durable power of attorney, designating Amy rather than Becca as my agent should I become incapacitated, and creating a revocable trust for my assets with explicit instructions for their management and distribution. This isn't just about protecting yourself from Becca's misguided efforts, Martin explained. It's about ensuring your artistic legacy as well. Your work now has recognized cultural and financial value that should be properly preserved and managed. The practical focus helped me channel my hurt into productive action. Instead of collapsing under the weight of my daughter's betrayal, I found myself building new structures of support and protection, reaching out to people who valued both me and my work. Dr. Chen became an unexpected ally in this process. When I explained the situation during one of our exhibition planning meetings, his response was immediate and supportive. The museum would like to discuss a more formal relationship with you beyond this exhibition, he said. We've been considering establishing an archive of your work, including documentation of your techniques and creative process. This would not only preserve your artistic legacy, but would establish institutional recognition of your significance as an artist. The conversation evolved into concrete plans for the museum to maintain a comprehensive record of my quilts, including those already sold or gifted, with professional photographs, provenance information, and technical details. They would also record in-depth interviews about my methods, influences, and artistic philosophy. This kind of institutional backing carries significant weight, Martin confirmed when I told him about the museum's plans. It further establishes you as a recognized artist rather than a hobbyist, making any claim of irrational behavior regarding your quilting essentially impossible to sustain. While I focused on these practical protections, Amy took on the emotional labor of dealing with Becca. My sister reported back that Becca remained convinced she was acting out of concern for my well-being, unable or unwilling to recognize the controlling nature of her actions or the profound disrespect they demonstrated. She keeps saying things like, "Mom will thank me when she's older," and "We have to think about her long-term care before it's a crisis," Amy told me after one particularly difficult phone call with my daughter. She's completely bought into this narrative that you're one step away from being found buried under fabric scraps. "What does James say about all this?" I asked, wondering about my son-in-law's role in these machinations. Amy grimaced. "He's the one who suggested looking into conservatorship in the first place. He knows someone whose parents went through something similar and thinks it's the responsible approach to elder management." "Elder management," I repeated, the sterile phrase landing like a slap. As if I'm a portfolio to be managed rather than a person to be respected. "I told them both they were making a terrible mistake," Amy said. "That if they pursued this, they would destroy any chance of reconciliation with you. Becca just said I was enabling your impractical artistic delusions, and that someday I'd regret not supporting her efforts to help you." I shook my head, the pain of Becca's betrayal still raw. "And Zoe? Have you heard anything about how she's doing with all this?" Amy's expression softened. "She asked about you when I visited last weekend. She wanted to know if you were still having your museum party, and if she could come." Becca shut down that conversation pretty quickly. The thought of my granddaughter caught in this conflict broke my heart, but I couldn't see a way to reach her without potentially making things worse. For now, I had to focus on protecting myself and preserving my relationship with Zoe for the future. As the exhibition opening approached, my life took on a surreal quality. By day, I worked with Dr. Chen and his team, selecting and arranging my quilts, reviewing catalog text, and preparing for the educational programming that would accompany the exhibition. By night, I consulted with Martin about legal protections and worked on new pieces that seemed to flow from my needle with a fresh urgency and clarity. The creative surge surprised me. Rather than being stifled by the conflict with Becca, I found myself producing some of my most powerful work. The betrayal, the hurt, the determination to stand my ground, all of it poured into my quilts in complex patterns and vibrant color combinations that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. "There's a new boldness in these pieces," Sophia observed when she stopped by to check on me. "A fearlessness. It's like you've shed some kind of constraint." She was right. For decades, I'd created beautiful, technically accomplished work, but I'd always held something back, some essential part of myself. Now, facing the potential loss of my autonomy, I found myself creating with total abandon, with complete commitment, to my artistic voice. "I feel like I've been quilting in a whisper all these years," I told Sophia. "Now I'm finally allowing myself to shout." A week before the exhibition opening, Martin called with news that both relieved and saddened me. "I've received formal notification from Rebecca's attorney," he said. "They're withdrawing all inquiries regarding conservatorship proceedings." I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Why the change? The letter cites further assessment of the situation and recognition of Eleanor Parker's demonstrated competence. Reading between the lines, I believe they consulted with other attorneys who made it clear that they had no viable case, especially given the documentation we've assembled. They were advised to withdraw rather than pursue a losing battle that would potentially damage family relationships. The relief of knowing I wouldn't have to fight my own daughter in court was immediate and profound. But it came with a hollow ache. The damage to our relationship had already been done. Becca had been willing to try to legally strip me of my autonomy. She had only stopped because she'd been told she couldn't win, not because she recognized the fundamental wrongness of her approach. "Thank you, Martin," I said finally, "for everything." "There's one more thing," he added. "The letter requests that any communication regarding this matter or any other issues between you and Rebecca be directed through their attorney going forward. The formality stung. My own daughter now wanted to communicate with me only through legal intermediaries. "I understand," I said quietly. "Please let them know I'll respect that request." After the call ended, I sat in my studio surrounded by the vibrant quilts that would soon hang in a prestigious museum, recognized as significant works of art. The validation should have felt triumphant, but instead, a profound sadness settled over me. In gaining recognition for my life's work, I had somehow lost my only child. I picked up a needle and turned to the quilt currently mounted on my frame, a piece I'd started after learning about Becca's conservatorship inquiry. It featured fragmented, traditional blocks that appeared to be breaking apart and reforming into new patterns, the chaos resolving into unexpected harmony at the edges. I'd been working on it obsessively, the repetitive motion of quilting both soothing my anxiety and channeling my complex emotions. As I settled into the familiar rhythm of stitching, I thought about the exhibition opening in just 7 days. Would Becca come? Would she bring Zoe? The thought of celebrating this milestone without my family left a hollow space inside me that no amount of professional recognition could fill. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. The museum had arranged for a car to pick me up, and I found myself both anticipating and dreading the evening ahead. Dr. Chen had warned me that the opening had generated significant interest, with RSVPs exceeding CU expectations. There would be art critics, collectors, museum patrons, and other textile artists in attendance. Amy arrived early to help me prepare, bringing a lovely outfit she'd insisted on purchasing for the occasion. A flowing silk tunic in shades of blue that complemented my silver hair, paired with elegant black trousers. "You should look like the artist you are," she said firmly when I protested the expense. "This is your night, Ellie. I want you to feel beautiful and confident." As I dressed, applying light makeup and fastening our mother's pearl earrings, I couldn't help wondering if Becca would appear despite our legal standoff. I hadn't directly invited her. Respecting her request for communication through attorneys seemed to preclude social invitations, but the exhibition had been featured in several Boston publications. She would know about it. "Do you think she'll come?" I asked Amy as we prepared to leave. Amy squeezed my hand. "I don't know. But either way, I'll be there. Sophia will be there. Your quilting circle friends will be there. You have people who truly see and value you, Ellie. Focus on them tonight." The museum had been transformed for the opening. As we entered through a side entrance reserved for staff and featured artists, I caught glimpses of the exhibition space. Dramatic lighting highlighting the dimensional texture of my quilts. Elegantly, printed placards describing my techniques and inspiration, a looping video showing close-ups of my intricate stitching playing on a large screen. "Mrs. Parker," Dr. Chen greeted me warmly, taking both my hands in his. "The exhibition looks magnificent. Your work has never been displayed more beautifully." He led Amy and me on a private tour before the public opening, explaining the curatorial decisions behind the arrangement of pieces and pointing out special features of the installation. Seeing my quilts in this context, professionally lit, expertly mounted, accompanied by scholarly text, was surreal. These were the same pieces that had draped over my sewing table, that had been pinned to my design wall, that had kept me company through long nights of grief and solitude. Now they hung like paintings, valued for their artistic merit rather than their utilitarian origins. "We've already had inquiries from 2 other museums about potentially hosting this exhibition after its run here," Dr. Chen informed me as we completed our tour. "Your work is generating exactly the kind of scholarly interest we hoped it would." As 7 o'clock approached, museum staff directed me to the entrance of the exhibition space where I would greet guests alongside Dr. Chen. Amy positioned herself nearby, a steadfast presence offering silent support. The doors opened, and people began to stream in. More people than I had expected. their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine engagement as they encountered my work. Dr. Chen made introductions, and I found myself deep in conversations about technique, inspiration, and the evolution of my artistic practice. "Your use of negative space is revolutionary," one textile professor told me earnestly. "You've completely reimagined traditional piecing methods. The historical references in your work are so thoughtfully integrated with contemporary sensibilities," commented an art historian. "It's a masterclass in honoring tradition while pushing boundaries." An hour into the event, as I was explaining my color philosophy to a group of enthusiastic art students, I felt a tug at my sleeve. It was Sophia, her expression a mixture of concern and warning. "Ellie," she said quietly, "Becca's here, with James and Zoe." My heart leapt and plummeted simultaneously. "Where?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sophia nodded toward the far corner of the gallery where my Threads of Memory collection was displayed. There they were, Becca looking tense and uncomfortable in an expensive suit that seemed more appropriate for a corporate meeting than an art opening, James scanning the room with the calculating gaze I knew well, and Zoe, my beautiful granddaughter, staring open-mouthed at my quilts with unabashed wonder. "Should I run interference?" Sophia offered. "I can keep them occupied if you're not ready to talk to them." I shook my head. "No, they're here. That's something at least." I excused myself from the students and made my way across the crowded gallery, accepting congratulations and comments from attendees as I passed. When I was about halfway to my family, Zoe spotted me. Her face lit up like sunrise, and before either of her parents could react, she broke away from them and ran toward me. "Grandma!" she cried, throwing her arms around my waist. "Your quilts are amazing! They're in a real museum!" I hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feeling of her small body against mine in case this moment had to last me a long time. "I've missed you so much, sweetheart," I whispered. "I missed you too," she said, pulling back to look up at me with earnest eyes. "Mom said we couldn't visit because you weren't feeling well, but you look fine too." Over Zoe's head, I saw Becca approaching slowly, her expression guarded. James hung back, observing the interaction with the detached analysis that seemed to be his default setting. "Hello, Mom," Becca said stiffly when she reached us. "Congratulations on your exhibition." "Thank you for coming," I replied, matching her formal tone while keeping an arm around Zoe's shoulders. "It means a lot to see you here." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with all the words we weren't saying. Finally, Becca gestured vaguely at the crowded gallery. "This is impressive. There are a lot of people here." "The museum has been wonderful," I said. "Dr. Chen and his team have done an amazing job presenting the work." Another silence. Zoe looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Did you see my quilt, Mom?" she asked Becca, breaking the impasse. "Grandma made one with constellations that glow in the dark. It's over there." Becca's expression softened slightly as she looked down at her daughter. "We'll look at all the quilts, Zoe. That's why we're here." Zoe tugged at my hand. "Can you show us, Grandma? Can you tell us the stories behind them?" I glanced at Becca, seeking permission. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Lead the way," she said. For the next 45 minutes, I guided my family through the exhibition, explaining each quilt's inspiration, technique, and meaning. Zoe asked dozens of questions, her curiosity and enthusiasm infectious. Even James seemed genuinely interested in the technical aspects of my work, asking thoughtful questions about construction methods and material choices. Becca remained largely silent, her expression unreadable as she studied each piece. It wasn't until we reached the final section, my most recent works created during the conflict over the conservatorship, that she spoke directly to me again. "These are different," she said, gesturing to the quilt with fragmented traditional blocks reforming into new patterns. "They feel I don't know. Angrier, maybe. More intense. They are, I acknowledged. These were created during a difficult period. She met my eyes briefly, then looked away. They're powerful, she admitted quietly. I can feel the emotion in them. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps the closest thing to understanding she could offer in that moment. As we completed the circuit of the exhibition, Dr. Chen approached, his expression bright with excitement. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "I hope you don't mind, but the Boston Art Review critic would like to interview you for their feature. They're particularly interested in your innovative approach to traditional quilting techniques." I glanced at my family, reluctant to cut our time short despite the lingering awkwardness. "Go ahead, Mom," Becca said, surprising me. "We'll wait. This is your night." The interview took longer than expected, the critic's questions thoughtful and probing, requiring me to articulate aspects of my creative process I'd never put into words before. When it finally concluded, I searched the gallery for my family, worried they might have left. Instead, I found them in front of my signature piece, the quilt that had caught Dr. Chen's attention in Sophia's window display. Becca stood slightly apart from James and Zoe, studying the intricate stitching with focused attention. "This is your best one," she said without preamble as I approached. "There's something about the composition that just works." "That was the first quilt I made after your father died," I told her. "It took me almost a year to complete." She looked at me sharply. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot about my quilting you don't know," I said gently. "There's a lot about me you don't know." She nodded slowly, her eyes returning to the quilt. "I'm starting to realize that." The admission hung between us, not quite a reconciliation, but perhaps the opening of a door that had been firmly closed. Our moment was interrupted by Dr. Chen, who approached with a distinguished-looking couple. "Mrs. Parker, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. They're very interested in discussing a potential commission." I excused myself to speak with the couple, aware of Becca watching the interaction with newfound curiosity. When I returned after arranging a follow-up meeting about the commission, James checked his watch and nodded to Becca. "We should probably get Zoe home," he said. "School night." Becca hesitated, then turned to Zoe. "Say goodbye to Grandma, sweetheart, and thank you for showing us your beautiful quilts," she added, addressing me directly. Zoe threw her arms around me again. "Can I come see you soon?" she whispered fiercely. "I want to learn how to make quilts like yours." Before I could respond, Becca answered for me. "We'll figure something out," she said, her tone careful but not dismissive. "Maybe this weekend?" The tentative invitation caught me by surprise. "I'd like that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My door is always open to all of you." As they prepared to leave, Becca lingered for a moment. "The museum exhibition is really impressive, Mom," she said. "I had no idea your quilting was like this. I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner." It wasn't the full apology I might have hoped for, with no mention of the conservatorship attempt or the hurtful things she'd said about my work. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of error, however limited. "Thank you for coming," I said simply. "It means more than you know." After they left, Amy found me standing alone, still processing the interaction. "How did it go?" she asked cautiously. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Not as well as I might have hoped. But Becca suggested Zoe might visit this weekend, so that's something." Amy squeezed my arm. "It's a start, Ellie. That's all you can ask for right now." The remainder of the opening passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and congratulations. By the time the last guest departed and the museum staff began closing up, I was exhausted but filled with a deep, quiet satisfaction. My work had been seen and valued. My artistic voice had been heard. As Amy and I prepared to leave, Dr. Chen approached with a small gift bag. a small token to commemorate this evening," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a beautiful book, featuring fiber artists from around the world, and there, listed in the index among names I had studied and admired for years, was Parker Eleanor. I ran my finger over the printed letters, the tangible evidence of my place in the artistic canon. "Thank you," I said, emotion thickening my voice. "For everything. For seeing value in my work when others dismissed it as just a hobby." Dr. Chen smiled. "It was never just anything, Mrs. Parker. True art never is." The car ride home was quiet, both Amy and I processing the events of the evening. As we pulled into my driveway, Amy turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "What? Now, Ellie?" she asked. "Where do you go from here?" It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider, too focused on the immediate challenges of protecting myself legally and preparing for the exhibition. But now, with my work recognized and my autonomy secured, new possibilities stretched before me. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "But for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I have choices. Real choices about my future." Amy nodded, understanding the significance of that statement. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. And I have a feeling Becca will come around eventually. Tonight was a good first step." As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself drawn to my studio. The half-finished quilt on my frame seemed to glow in the moonlight streaming through the windows. I ran my hand over the fabric, feeling the texture of the stitches beneath my fingertips. This work had saved me in more ways than one. It had given me purpose after Will's death, a way to process grief and find beauty in fragments. It had provided financial security when I needed it most. And now, it had given me something I hadn't even known I was missing. Recognition not just as a mother or a widow or a caretaker, but as an artist with a unique voice and vision. For decades, I had quilted in the margins of my life, in the hours left over after meeting everyone else's needs. Now, for the first time, my art would take center stage. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I sat at my sewing machine, turning on just the small task light that illuminated the workspace. In the quiet of the night, I began to stitch, not with any particular project in mind, but simply for the joy of feeling fabric and thread come together beneath my hands. As I worked, I realized I was smiling. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation with Becca or new artistic challenges or both, I would face it with needle and thread in hand, creating beauty one stitch at a time. My quilting wasn't just a hobby or even just a career. It was my voice, my legacy, my way of making sense of the world. And finally, gloriously, that voice was being heard. The weekend following the exhibition opening arrived with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Becca had texted on Friday to confirm that she would bring Zoe for a visit on Saturday afternoon. Her message was polite but distant, with no mention of our fragile truce at the museum or the attempted conservatorship that still hung between us like an unfinished seam. I spent Saturday morning preparing, baking Zoe's favorite chocolate chip, cookies, tidying the house, and setting up a small quilting station in the studio with fabric scraps and simple patterns suitable for a beginner. I wanted everything to be perfect, aware that this visit represented a crucial thread in the possible reweaving of our family fabric. They arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Becca's silver SUV pulled into the driveway, and Zoe tumbled out before. The engine had fully stopped, racing toward the front porch with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Grandma," she called, throwing herself into my waiting arms. "I brought my sketchbook. I've been designing quilts ever since we saw yours at the museum." I hugged her tightly, savoring the warmth of her small body against mine. "I can't wait to see them," I said, looking over her head at Becca, who approached more cautiously, a large tote bag slung over her shoulder. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for having us." The formality stung, but I matched. Her tone. I'm glad you could come. Please come in. Zoe darted ahead into the house, immediately making herself at home as she always had before our estrangement. Becca followed more slowly, her eyes scanning the entry hall and living room with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've rearranged things?" she observed, noting the new placement of furniture and the framed exhibition poster now hanging in the place of honor above the fireplace. "Yes," I acknowledged. "After the exhibition preparation, I decided it was time for some changes." What I didn't say was that rearranging the house had been a deliberate act of reclaiming my space after feeling it threatened. Every decision about what to keep, what to move, what to display had been made with conscious intention rather than simply maintaining what had always been. "It looks nice," Becca said after a moment. "Organized." The grudging compliment revealed what she had expected to find: the cluttered fabric-strewn home she had described to lawyers as evidence of my supposed hoarding. Instead, she found a well-ordered, thoughtfully arranged space that reflected both my artistic sensibility and my very sound mind. "Thank you," I said simply, refusing to acknowledge the implied surprise in her tone. "Would you like some tea?" "I've just made a fresh pot." We moved to the kitchen, where Zoe was already inspecting the cookie jar with focused interest. The awkwardness between Becca and me eased somewhat as we busied ourselves with the familiar rituals of tea and cookies, finding neutral topics of conversation in Zoe's school activities and the unseasonably warm spring weather. "Can we see your studio, Grandma?" Zoe asked when she had consumed what I considered an impressive number of cookies for someone her size. "I want to show you my designs." I glanced at Becca, who nodded her permission. "Of course," I said, leading the way down the hall to the sunroom that had been my creative sanctuary for so many years. Zoe gasped as we entered the light-filled space. "Wow, it's like a real artist's studio." Indeed, the room had transformed significantly since Becca had last seen it. Gone was the somewhat haphazard arrangement of fabric bins and project baskets that had accumulated over years of making do. In their place stood custom-built shelving units displaying neatly organized fabric collections arranged by color and type. My sewing machine occupied a dedicated station with ergonomic seating and task lighting. The design wall now took up an entire side of the room, currently displaying the beginnings of a new quilt inspired by the changing light on the Berkshire Hills through the seasons. "Mr. Chen from the museum helped me reorganize," I explained, noting Becca's widened eyes. "He suggested ways to create a more professional working environment, especially with the commissions I've received since the exhibition." "Commissions?" Becca echoed. "Yes, 3 so far, with inquiries about several more. The Harringtons you met at the opening have commissioned a large piece for their summer home in Maine, and the museum gift shop has asked about producing limited edition prints of some of my designs." I spoke matter-of-factly, neither boasting nor diminishing my success. This was simply my reality now, a working artist with legitimate professional opportunities. Becca's expression flickered between surprise and something less readable. That's wonderful, Mom. I had no idea quilting could be so commercially viable." "A few artistic pursuits are commercially viable in their early stages," I replied mildly. "That's why they require passion and commitment to sustain through the years of development." Our exchange was interrupted by Zoe, who had settled herself at the small work table I'd prepared for her. "Look, Grandma, these are my designs." I turned gratefully to my granddaughter, who was spreading out pages filled with colorful drawings of quilt patterns. Some were recognizable traditional blocks rendered with childish enthusiasm, while others were wonderfully imaginative creations that defied conventional categories. "These are marvelous, Zoe," I said, genuinely impressed by her creativity. "You have a wonderful sense of color and pattern." "Can you teach me how to make a real one?" she asked eagerly. "Even just a small one?" I had prepared for this very request, setting out pre-cut fabric squares in cheerful prints and solids. "We can start right now if you like." I thought we could make a simple 9-patch block that you could turn into a pillow cover. Zoe clapped her hands in delight and slid onto the stool I'd positioned for her. I glanced at Becca, who had remained near the door, observing our interaction with an unreadable expression. "Would you like to join us?" I offered, gesturing to another stool. "There's plenty of room." She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I should let you two have your time together. I have some work emails to catch up on. I'll just be in the living room if you need me." As Becca retreated, I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. Even now, with all that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to engage with the creative work that defined so much of who I was. But I pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the eager child before me, hungry to learn the craft that had sustained me through the hardest moments of my life. For the next 2 hours, Zoe and I worked together on her first quilting project. I showed her how to arrange the squares to create a balanced composition, how to piece them with careful 1/4-inch seams, how to press the fabric to make the block lie flat. She was a quick study, her small fingers surprisingly deft with needle and thread. "Grandma," she said as she completed the final seam of her 9-patch block, "how did you learn to quilt? Did your mom teach you?" I smiled, threading a needle, to show her how to begin quilting the layers together. "My grandmother taught me when I was about your age. My mother didn't so much, she worked full-time as a nurse. But my grandmother lived with us, and she was an expert quilter. She had learned from her mother, who learned from hers, going back generations." "So it's like a family tradition?" Zoe asked, carefully following my demonstration of how to make small, even stitches through all 3 layers of her project. "It is. Though every generation adds their own ideas and techniques. My grandmother made very traditional quilts with precise patterns. I started that way too, but over time I developed my own style." "Mom doesn't quilt," Zoe observed. "She says she doesn't have time for crafts." I chose my words carefully, aware that whatever I said might be repeated to Becca later. "Your mom has different talents. She's very good at her job, and she works hard to provide a wonderful life for you. But she doesn't make anything with her hands," Zoe persisted. "Not like you do." "People express themselves in different ways," I said gently. "Not everyone finds joy in the same activities." Zoe concentrated on her stitching for a moment, then looked up with the directness only children can manage. "Mom? Was really surprised by your quilts at the museum. I heard her telling Dad that she never knew you were so talented. She said she felt bad for not noticing. The revelation caught me by surprise. Becca had shared no such thoughts with me." "Well," I said carefully, "sometimes we don't really see the people closest to us. We think we know them so well that we stop looking closely." "I see you, Grandma," Zoe said with touching conviction. "And I think your quilts are the most beautiful things in the whole world." I blinked back sudden tears. "That means more to me than you know, sweetheart." When we emerged from the studio an hour later, Zoe proudly carrying her completed pillow top, we found Becca not working on emails as she'd claimed, but standing in the living room, studying the photographs of my exhibition that I'd arranged in an album on the coffee table. She looked up with a faintly guilty expression, as if caught prying. "These are good photos," she said. "The lighting really shows the detail in your work." "The museum hired a professional photographer," I explained. "They wanted high-quality documentation for their archives." Becca nodded, closing the album. Carefully, "It's all very impressive, Mom. I had no idea quilting could be like this. So recognized, so respected." "Few people do," I acknowledged. "Most think of quilts as bedspreads or wall hangings for country kitchens. They don't see the artistic possibilities of the medium." "I was one of those people," Becca admitted quietly. "I didn't see it either." The acknowledgement hung between us, not quite an apology, but perhaps a step toward understanding. Before I could respond, Zoe bounded forward, eager to show off her creation. "Mom, look what I made with Grandma!" she exclaimed, proudly displaying her pieced and partially quilted square. "It's going to be a pillow for my bed." Becca examined the square with genuine interest. "This is beautiful, Zoe. Did you really sew this yourself?" "Grandma helped with the hard parts, but I did all the straight seams myself. And I picked all the fabrics." Her face glowed with pride. "Grandma says I have a good eye for color." "She's right," Becca agreed, surprising me with her sincerity. "You've always had a good sense of what goes together." The moment felt precious and fragile. 3 generations of women, connected however tenuously by creativity and shared experience. I wanted to preserve it somehow, to stitch it into memory as securely as I would stitch a binding onto a finished quilt. "I've made a light supper," I said. "Would you both stay and eat before you head back to Boston?" Becca hesitated, then checked her watch. "We really should get back. Zoe has homework to finish for Monday, and James is expecting us." The disappointment must have shown on my face because she quickly added, "But maybe next time we could stay. Longer. Perhaps even overnight. If that would be all right with you?" "I would like that very much," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "Your room is always ready for you, and the guest room would be perfect for Zoe." "My old room?" Becca repeated, something shifting in her expression. "I thought maybe you'd have converted it by now, for your work or something." I shook my head. "No, it's still your room. I've updated the bedding and curtains, but otherwise it's just as you left it." She nodded, a complex emotion crossing her face. "Thank you," she said simply. After they left, I found myself restless with unresolved feelings. The visit had gone well, better than I had dared hope, but beneath the surface pleasantries lay the still unaddressed hurt of Becca's betrayal. We had skirted around it, treating the symptoms without addressing the disease. I returned to my studio, drawn to the comfort of fabric and thread. The half-finished quilt on my design wall seemed to pulse with potential energy, waiting for my hands to release it. I worked late into the evening, losing myself in the rhythmic meditation of quilting, trying to stitch together in fabric what I couldn't yet resolve in words. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Dr. Chen called early, his voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Parker," he said without preamble, "I've just received word that your exhibition has been reviewed in the New York Times art section. It's extraordinary. I'm emailing you the link now." I thanked him, promising to call back after I'd read the review, and hurried to my computer. The email from Dr. Chen contained a link with the subject line, "Major Recognition, NYT Art Review." The review, written by a respected art critic known for her exacting standards, was titled Eleanor Parker's Threads of Memory, Redefining American Textile Art. It was not just positive but glowing, describing my work as revolutionary in its technical innovation while deeply rooted in American quilting traditions, and praising my sophisticated use of color and negative space to create works of profound emotional resonance. Most stunning was the final paragraph. Parker emerges as a significant American artist whose work demands serious consideration. That she has created this extraordinary body of work largely in isolation, without formal training or institutional support, makes her achievement all the more remarkable. The Berkshire Textile Museum deserves credit for discovering and championing an artist whose contribution to American fiber arts will likely be studied and celebrated for generations to come. I sat at my desk, reading and rereading the words until they began to blur through my tears. For so many years I had worked alone, finding joy and meaning in my quilting without external validation. I had never sought fame or critical acclaim. Those weren't the reasons I stitched. But to have my life's work recognized with such seriousness and respect was a form of vindication I hadn't known I needed. My phone rang again, startling me from my reverie. It was Amy, her voice breathless with excitement. "Ellie, have you seen the Times review? It's incredible." "I just read it," I confirmed. "I can hardly believe it's real." "It's real, all right. And it's going to change everything. You realize that, don't you? This kind of recognition doesn't come along every day." She was right. By afternoon, my email inbox was flooded with messages from gallery owners, collectors, museum curators, and fellow textile artists. My quiet, carefully rebuilt life was about to become considerably less quiet. Among the flood of messages was a brief text from Becca. "Just saw the NYT review. Congratulations, Mom. Truly deserved." The acknowledgement warmed me, even as I noted its carefully maintained distance. Over the next few weeks, my schedule filled with interviews, meetings, and studio visits. The Berkshire Textile Museum extended my exhibition by an additional 3 months due to unprecedented attendance numbers. 2 commercial galleries contacted me about representation, and a publisher approached me about a book focusing on my quilting techniques and artistic journey. Through it all, I maintained a careful balance, accepting opportunities that aligned with my artistic values, while declining those that felt exploitative or commercial. I had waited too long for this recognition to compromise my vision now. Zoe and Becca visited twice more during this whirlwind period. Each time, Zoe and I spent hours in the studio, her quilting skills developing rapidly under my guidance. Becca remained on the periphery of these creative sessions, watching with what seemed like a mixture of admiration and regret. During their 3rd visit, as Zoe worked contentedly on a small wall hanging she had designed herself, Becca finally broached the subject we had been avoiding. "Mom," she said quietly, joining me at the cutting table where I was preparing fabric, "for a new piece. I owe you an apology. A real one, not just polite acknowledgments." I set down my rotary cutter, giving her my full attention. "I'm listening." Becca took a deep breath, her professional composure momentarily wavering. "What I did, looking into conservatorship, trying to force you into Pinewood, dismissing your work as just a hobby. It was wrong. Deeply wrong. I was controlling and disrespectful, and I'm sorry." The words I had waited months to hear finally hung in the air between us. I allowed myself to really feel them before responding. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It means a great deal to me." Becca glanced at Zoe, who was happily absorbed in her project, then lowered her voice further. "When James and I first discussed approaching you about downsizing, I genuinely thought we were acting out of concern. But looking back, I can see we were making assumptions based on stereotypes about aging and about what constitutes meaningful work." She fingered a piece of fabric on the cutting table, her eyes avoiding mine. "The truth is, I was uncomfortable with your independence, with your having a life and passion that had nothing to do with me or my needs. That's a hard thing to admit, but it's true." The honesty of her self-assessment surprised me. "That couldn't have been easy to recognize," I said. "It wasn't." She gave a small, rueful smile. "It took seeing your work in a museum, reading reviews calling you a significant American artist, and watching Zoe fall in love with quilting to make me finally see what's been in front of me all along." "And what's that?" I asked. "That you're not just my mother. You're a whole person with talents and ambitions that exist completely independent of your relationship to me." She shook her head. "It sounds so obvious when I say it out loud, but somehow I never really got it until now." Her insight moved me deeply. This was the heart of our conflict. Not just her dismissal of my quilting, but her inability to see me as a complete human being beyond my role as her mother. "I spent so many years defining myself primarily as your mother," I acknowledged. "It's not surprising you saw me that way, too. But after your father died, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been set aside. My quilting became more than just a hobby. It became my voice, my way of processing life. I wish I had understood that sooner, Becca said, before I did so much damage. We can't change the past, I replied gently, but we can stitch a new pattern going forward. She smiled at my quilting metaphor. I'd like that, she said, then hesitated before adding, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I've been wrestling with. The serious tone of her voice concerned me. What is it? I'm thinking of making a career change, she said. Pharmaceutical marketing has never really fulfilled me, and lately I've been questioning a lot of my choices. This was unexpected. Becca had always seemed so certain of her professional path, so committed to corporate success. What are you considering instead? I've applied to a master's program in art therapy, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Working with children and elderly patients, using creative expression as a healing modality. It would mean a significant pay cut, at least initially, but James supports the idea. I was momentarily speechless, trying to process this radical shift in my achievement-oriented daughter's life plan. Watching you with your quilts, she continued, filling my silence. Seeing how your art has sustained you through difficult times, how it's given you purpose and joy. It made me realize I want work that feels meaningful in that way. And seeing how Zoe responds to creative activities, how centered and focused she becomes, it just clicked for me. Art therapy, I repeated, the concept settling in my mind. Becca, I think that sounds wonderful. Truly. Her face relaxed, relief evident in her expression. You do? You don't think it's impractical or a step backward career-wise? I think it's a step toward authenticity, I said. And that's never a step backward. Our conversation was interrupted by Zoe, who came bouncing over with her completed wall hanging. Look, I finished it. Can we hang it up somewhere everyone can see it? As we admired Zoe's creation and debated the best place to display it, I felt something shift and settle between Becca and me. Not a complete healing of our wounded relationship, but a genuine beginning. We were seeing each other more clearly now, recognizing in each other what we had both sought independently, the courage to define ourselves on our own terms. That evening, after Becca and Zoe had returned to Boston with promises to visit again, the following weekend, I sat in my studio watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. On my design wall hung the beginnings of a new quilt, one incorporating scraps from Zoe's projects alongside pieces of my own work, creating a visual conversation between generations. My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. It was Dr. Chen calling with news that would once again reshape my understanding of what was possible in this late-blooming chapter of my artistic life. Mrs. Parker, he said, his normally composed voice unusually animated. I've just gotten off the phone with the curatorial team at the American Folk Art Museum in New York. They want to mount a major retrospective of your work next year, with the accompanying scholarly catalog and educational programming. The American Folk Art Museum, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country for textile arts. A retrospective that would place my work in the context of American artistic heritage. That's extraordinary, I managed, my voice barely audible. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. They've submitted your name for consideration for the National Heritage Fellowship. It's the highest honor in the folk and traditional arts, presented by the National Endowment for the Arts. I gripped the phone tighter, overwhelmed by the implications. The National Heritage Fellowship recognized lifetime achievement and significant contributions to our cultural heritage. It was an honor typically reserved for artists with decades of public recognition behind them, not someone who had emerged on the national scene less than a year ago. But I've only just begun to receive recognition, I protested. Surely there are others more deserving. Mrs. Parker, Dr. Chen said gently, You've been creating significant work for over 40 years. The fact that the art world has only recently discovered you doesn't diminish the importance of your contribution. In many ways, it makes your story even more compelling. After we ended the call, I sat in the growing darkness of my studio, trying to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. From dismissal to validation, from invisibility to recognition, from isolation to community, the transformation of my artistic life had been swift and profound. Yet beneath the excitement of these new opportunities lay a quieter, deeper satisfaction. Becca was beginning to see me as I truly was, and I was beginning to understand her more fully as well. That reconciliation, still fragile but growing stronger, felt more significant than any professional accolade. I turned to the half-finished quilt on my frame, running my fingers over the intricate stitches that documented my journey more eloquently than words ever could. Each stitch represented a moment of my life. The joys and sorrows, the loneliness and connection, the doubts and certainties that had shaped me as a woman and as an artist. For so long, I had quilted in silence, finding meaning in the process, itself without expectation of wider recognition. Now that recognition had come, sudden and overwhelming, but the essential joy remained unchanged. The communion between hand and fabric, needle and thread, vision and execution. Whatever came next, museum retrospectives or quiet afternoons teaching Zoe to quilt, national awards or simple family reconciliation, I would face it with the patience and precision I had learned through decades at my frame. Stitch by stitch, piece by piece, I would continue creating beauty from fragments, meaning from chaos, wholeness from what had been broken. 1 year after my first exhibition at the Berkshire Textile Museum, I stood in the Grand Gallery of the American Folk Art Museum in New York City, surrounded by my life's work. Quilts I had created across 4 decades hung on the pristine white walls, dramatically lit to highlight their dimensionality and texture. Display cases housed my sketchbooks and design notes. A video installation showed my hands at work, the rhythmic movement of needle through fabric hypnotic in its deliberate grace. "It's remarkable," whispered Amy, who stood beside me during this private preview before the official opening. "Seeing them all together like this, it tells your whole life story." She was right. The retrospective, titled Eleanor Parker, Stitching Through Time, had been curated chronologically, beginning with my earliest traditional pieces and flowing through my artistic evolution to my most recent boundary-pushing works. Walking through the exhibition was like moving through the chapters of my life. The young mother creating functional beauty for her family home. The grieving widow finding solace in the meditative rhythm of quilting. The mature artist experimenting with form and technique, the recognized master synthesizing tradition and innovation. Mrs. Parker, called Dr. Chen, who had collaborated with the New York curators on the exhibition design. The director would like a photograph of you with your signature piece for the press materials. I moved to stand beside Fragments of Memory, the quilt that had first caught Dr. Chen's attention in Sophia's shop window. Now it occupied the central position in the main gallery, identified by a plaque as the pivotal work that signals Parker's emergence as a major voice in contemporary fiber arts. As the photographer positioned me beside my creation, I marveled at the journey that had brought me to this moment. Just over a year ago, Becca had dismissed my quilting as just a hobby for old ladies. Now I stood in one of the country's most prestigious museums, about to be honored with a major retrospective. The thought of Becca brought a smile to my face. She would be arriving tomorrow with James and Zoe for the official opening, having arranged time off from both her job and her newly begun studies in art therapy. Our relationship had been gradually mending over the past year, not without occasional bumps and setbacks, but with a growing mutual respect that felt like solid ground beneath our feet. "Perfect," declared the photographer after capturing several angles. "These will be wonderful for the press release." Press release. The phrase still struck me as slightly absurd when applied to my work. For decades, I had quilted in relative obscurity, finding meaning and satisfaction in the process itself without expectation of public recognition. Now my inbox regularly filled with interview requests from art publications, invitations to speak at universities and museums, and inquiries from collectors interested in acquiring my pieces. The change in my professional circumstances had necessitated practical adjustments as well. With Martin Friedman's help, I had established Eleanor Parker, Fiber Arts LLC, to manage the business aspects of my suddenly flourishing career. Sophia had introduced me to her niece, a recent business school graduate with a background in arts administration, who now worked as my part-time assistant, handling correspondence and scheduling. Most significantly, I had converted Will's old study into a proper office, equipped with a computer setup that allowed me to maintain my website, designed by one of Zoe's former babysitters, and catalog my work digitally. The technological learning curve had been steep, but I had approached it with the same patient determination I brought to mastering a new quilting technique. "Mrs. Parker," called the museum director, approaching with a distinguished-looking woman in a tailored suit. "I'd like to introduce you to Catherine Harlow from the National Endowment for the Arts." I extended my hand, remembering Dr. Chen's mention of my nomination for the National Heritage Fellowship. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Harlow." "The pleasure is entirely mine," she replied warmly. "I've been following your work since the Berkshire exhibition. The way you honor traditional quilting techniques while pushing the boundaries of the form is exactly what we look for in our Heritage Fellows." We chatted amiably about the exhibition and my artistic process, the conversation flowing easily despite the lingering sense of unreality I felt at discussing my quilts in such a formal, institutional context. As we completed our tour of the galleries, Catherine handed me her card. "The fellowship announcements won't be made for another few months," she said. "But regardless of the outcome, I hope we can stay in touch. The NEA is very interested in your perspective on traditional arts in contemporary contexts." After she departed, Amy squeezed my arm excitedly. "Ellie, do you realize what this means? You're really being considered for the National Heritage Fellowship. That's the highest honor in the traditional arts." I nodded, still processing the implications. "It's extraordinary," I admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I've stepped into someone else's life." "Not someone else's life," Amy corrected gently. "The life that was always waiting for you to claim it." That evening, back in my hotel room, I called Becca to confirm her arrival time for the next day's opening. Our conversations had grown easier over the months, the awkwardness gradually giving way to a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or habit. "We'll be there by noon," she assured me. "Zoe is beside herself with excitement. She's made you a special gift for the occasion." "She didn't need to do that," I said, touched by my granddaughter's thoughtfulness. "She insisted, and I have something for you, too." Becca's voice held a note I couldn't quite identify, nervousness, perhaps, or anticipation. "You don't need to bring anything," I protested. "Having you all there is gift enough." "This is something different," she said cryptically. "Something long overdue." After we ended the call, I stood by the hotel window, gazing out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. So different from my quiet life in Oak Ridge, yet somehow I felt at home here too, in this city of ambition and art. Tomorrow, the exhibition would open to the public, cementing my unexpected position in the art world. Yet amid all the external validation, what mattered most was that Becca would be there, not out of obligation, but by choice. I slept surprisingly well, waking refreshed and ready for the day that would mark the most public recognition of my artistic life. Amy accompanied me to the museum early, helping me prepare for the series of interviews scheduled before the official opening. Journalists from art publications and mainstream media alike asked thoughtful questions about my techniques, influences, and artistic evolution. I found myself articulating aspects of my creative process I had never consciously examined before, discovering new insights about my own work through the act of describing it to others. Your late recognition has been compared to artists like Anna Mary Robertson, Grandma Moses, who wasn't discovered until her 70s, noted a writer from a major magazine. How does it feel to achieve such significant recognition at this stage of your life? I considered the question carefully. There's a special kind of freedom in it, I said finally. When you create for decades without external validation, you develop a relationship with your art that's incredibly pure. You do it because you must, because it speaks to something essential within you. The recognition is wonderful, of course, but it hasn't changed why I quilt or what I hope to express through my work. And what is that? The journalist prompted. What do you hope to express? That beauty can be created from fragments, I replied, the answer rising from some deep place of knowing. That patterns emerge from chaos, that what appears broken or discarded can be transformed into something whole and meaningful. That's the fundamental metaphor of quilting, and perhaps of life itself. The morning passed in a blur of conversations and photographs. Shortly before noon, as the final interview concluded, I felt a familiar presence and turned to see Becca, James, and Zoe entering the gallery. Zoe spotted me immediately and raced across the polished floor, narrowly avoiding a collision with a display pedestal. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my waist. "Your quilts look even more amazing in this museum than the last one." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so glad you could be here." James approached next, extending his hand with a warmth that had been developing gradually over our recent interactions. "Eleanor, congratulations. This is truly impressive." The formal use of my full name still felt slightly distant, but it was a significant improvement over the clinical detachment with which he had once discussed my retirement options. I accepted his handshake with a genuine smile. "Thank you, James. I appreciate you all making the trip." Becca hung back slightly, clutching a large flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. When our eyes met, something passed between us, a current of emotion too complex to name but undeniably powerful. "Mom," she said, stepping forward finally, "this is extraordinary. I'm so proud of you." The words, spoken with undisguised sincerity, washed over me like a healing balm. My daughter, who had once dismissed my art as a hobby, now stood in one of the nation's premier museums, expressing pride in my accomplishment. The journey from there to here had been painful but necessary, forging a new relationship from the ashes of misunderstanding. "Thank you," I said simply, embracing her. "It means the world that you're here." She returned the hug, then pulled back, holding out the package. "I have something for you. I wanted to give it to you before the opening." Curious, I accepted the package, noting its substantial weight and the careful wrapping. "Should I open it now?" Becca nodded, an uncharacteristic nervousness in her expression. "Please." I unwrapped the paper carefully, revealing what appeared to be a book, a large, leather-bound volume with considerable heft. On the cover, embossed in elegant gold lettering, were the words, "The Quilts of Eleanor Parker, a complete catalog." "Open it," Becca urged softly. I lifted the cover and my breath caught. Inside was a meticulously compiled catalog of my work, professional, photographs of quilts I had created over the decades, including many I had given away or sold long before my discovery by the art world. Each image was accompanied by detailed information, dimensions, materials, techniques, the date of creation, and the current location or owner if known. "How did you—" I began, turning pages with trembling fingers. "It started as my way of making amends," Becca explained. I reached out to everyone I could think of who might have received one of your quilts over the years. Family friends, my college roommates, Dad's colleagues. I found photos in our old family albums and scanned them. Then, when your exhibitions started generating attention, more people came forward with quilts you'd made. I continued paging through the catalog, astounded by its comprehensiveness. There were quilts I had almost forgotten creating, baby blankets for colleagues' children, wedding gifts for distant cousins, commemoration pieces for community events. Amy helped, Becca continued, and Sophia, and Dr. Chen provided the proper archival format. It's as complete as we could make it, though I'm sure there are still pieces we haven't tracked down. The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed me. This wasn't merely a beautiful book. It was a recognition of my entire creative life, an acknowledgement that my work had always mattered, even when it went unrecognized by the wider world. Becca, I said, my voice thick with emotion, this is the most meaningful gift anyone has ever given me. It's the least I could do, she replied, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. After everything. The everything hung between us. The dismissal, the attempted conservatorship, the fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what my quilting meant. But in this moment, it felt like the painful chapter was truly closing, allowing something new and stronger to begin. I have something for you too, interjected Zoe, bouncing with barely contained excitement. From her small backpack, she extracted a carefully folded square of fabric. I made it all by myself. Well, Ms. Rivera at school helped with the binding. But I did all the rest. She presented me with a small quilted piece, roughly 12 inches square. The design was simple but effective. A central star pattern surrounded by concentric squares, executed in vibrant purples and blues. The stitches were uneven in places. The points didn't quite match perfectly, but it radiated sincerity and joy. It's beautiful, Zoe, I said truthfully. Your first completed quilt. I'm going to be a quilter too, she declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Mom's been taking me to a class at the community center on Saturdays. Ms. Rivera says I have natural talent. I glanced at Becca, surprised. She hadn't mentioned enrolling Zoe in quilting classes during our regular phone calls. I wanted it to be a surprise, she explained, reading my expression. She's been asking ever since our first visit to your studio, and she really does have an aptitude for it. Just like her grandmother, James added, his tone lacking the dismissiveness it might once have held. Dr. Chen approached our family group, politely interrupting our moment. Mrs. Parker, we're about to open the doors. Would you like to be near the entrance to greet the first visitors? The remainder of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of introductions, conversations, and congratulations. Art enthusiasts, textile artists, museum patrons, and curious visitors streamed through the galleries, many stopping to share how my work had moved or inspired them. I found myself alternately overwhelmed and energized by the public response, grateful for the solid presence of my family beside me. During a brief quiet moment, as Zoe and James examined a display case containing my sketchbooks, and Becca chatted with Dr. Chen about the educational programming she was developing for her art therapy studies, Amy sidled up beside me. How are you holding up? She asked quietly. I smiled, watching a young woman with vivid blue hair photograph one of my most experimental pieces, while her companion took notes in a small sketchbook. It's surreal, I admitted. All these people finding meaning in work I created alone in my sunroom. That's the magic of art, isn't it? Amy mused. Once it exists in the world, it becomes something beyond the artist's original intention. It creates connections the maker could never have anticipated. I nodded, appreciating my sister's insight. I keep thinking about Will, I confessed. How much he would have loved seeing this. He always believed in my work, even when I wasn't sure myself. Amy squeezed my hand. "He's here," she said simply. "In every stitch, in every color choice, in the way you approach your art, and he'd be so proud, not just of this," she gestured, around the gallery, "but of how you've stood up for yourself, how you've reclaimed your voice." As the afternoon wore on, Catherine Harlow from the NEA reappeared, accompanied by several colleagues. They spent considerable time examining my work, occasionally making notes or conferring in hushed tones. Before departing, Catherine approached, me once more. "Mrs. Parker," she said warmly, "this exhibition confirms everything I believed about your work. The Fellowship Committee will be very interested in my report." After the museum closed to the public, the director hosted a small, private dinner for myself, my family, Dr. Chen, and several key museum patrons. Seated at the elegantly appointed table in the museum's boardroom, I felt a moment of dissonance. The woman who had once been dismissed as pursuing just a hobby for old ladies, now being honored as a significant American artist. Becca, seated beside me, seemed to sense my thoughts. "It's quite a journey from the Pinewood Acres brochures on your kitchen table, isn't it?" she said quietly. I turned to her, surprised by her direct reference to that painful confrontation. "Yes," I agreed, "though I never imagined where it would lead." She hesitated, then continued in a low voice meant only for me. "I owe you another apology, one I've been too ashamed to make directly." "You've already apologized, Becca," I assured her. "We've moved past that." She shook her head. "Not for everything. I've never properly acknowledged how close I came to taking legal action against you. The conservatorship inquiry." Her voice dropped even lower on the last words, heavy with lingering shame. I studied my daughter's face, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. "Why did you stop?" I asked, a question that had lingered unasked between us. "What changed your mind?" Becca glanced around to ensure our conversation remained private, then met my eyes directly. "The lawyers told us we had no case, of course, but it was more than that. The night after I spoke with them, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I was trying to do, and suddenly I saw it clearly. I wasn't trying to protect you. I was trying to control you because your independence frightened me." Her honesty touched me deeply. "Why did it frighten you?" "Because—" She paused, searching for words. "Because it meant you didn't need me. And if you didn't need me, then what was my role? Who was I to you? It sounds ridiculous now, but I think I needed you to need me in order to feel secure in our relationship." The insight was profound, revealing layers of insecurity I hadn't fully understood. "Oh, Becca," I said gently, "I've always needed you, just not in the way you thought. Not as a caretaker or decision-maker, but as my daughter, as family, as connection." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "I understand that now, and I'm so grateful we found our way back to each other before." She left the sentence unfinished, but I heard the unspoken fear. Before it was too late, before the damage was irreparable. "So am I," I said, reaching for her hand beneath the table. "So am I." The dinner concluded with a toast from the museum director, celebrating the exhibition and my contribution to American textile arts. As glasses were raised around the table, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, but a fulfillment of something long in the making. Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to find an email from Dr. Chen containing press photos from the exhibition. Among them was an image that caught my heart. Becca and Zoe standing before one of my quilts, their profiles illuminated by the gallery lighting. 3 generations of women connected by creativity and resilience. I sat quietly, letting the fullness of the moment wash over me. My quilting, once dismissed as a waste of time, had become the thread that rewove my family's bonds. The recognition from the art world was deeply gratifying, but the true victory lay elsewhere. In Becca's growing understanding, in Zoe's budding creativity, in my own reclamation of voice and vision. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., accepting the National Heritage Fellowship before an audience that included my beaming family. As I gave my acceptance speech, I spoke not of techniques or materials, but of persistence and authenticity. Art saved me, I told the hushed audience, not just once but again and again throughout my life. It gave me a voice when I couldn't find words. It gave me purpose when I felt lost. It gave me joy when joy seemed impossible. I looked directly at Becca, who sat in the front row between Amy and Zoe, her eyes bright with pride and love. And ultimately, it gave me back my family, helping us see each other more clearly across the distances we had created. Afterward, as we celebrated over dinner, Zoe presented me with another small quilted piece, this one showing considerably more technical skill than her first effort. "I'm working on a series," she informed me seriously, just like a real artist. "You are a real artist," I assured her. "The moment you create with intention and heart, you're a real artist." Becca, who had been listening to our exchange, added softly, "I wish I'd understood that sooner." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Everything in its time," I said. "Some patterns take longer to emerge than others." Returning home to Oak Ridge after the Washington ceremonies, I found my quiet house filled with flowers, congratulatory arrangements from neighbors, fellow quilters, and newly acquired art world connections. Among them was a simple vase of daisies from Sophia, accompanied by a card that made me laugh out loud. Not bad for a hobby, huh? I carried the flowers into my studio, now expanded to include part of the former guest room, creating a teaching space where I had begun offering master classes to committed quilters. On my design wall hung the beginnings of a new piece, one inspired by the journey of the past 18 months, with fragments representing conflict, resolution, and growth. As I settled at my sewing machine, needle poised above fabric, I felt the familiar certainty that had guided me through decades of creation. The world might now recognize my quilts as art worthy of museums and national honors, but the essential joy remained unchanged. The communion between hand and fabric, eye and color, heart and creative impulse. That joy had sustained me through. My hardest days had given me purpose, when purpose seemed elusive, had connected me to a lineage of women who had expressed their inner lives through needle and thread when other avenues of expression were closed to them. Now it would carry me forward into this unexpected final chapter of my artistic life, one enriched by recognition, but still fundamentally motivated by the simple, profound pleasure of creation. I pressed my foot to the pedal and began to stitch, adding another line to the ongoing story told in fabric and thread, a story of perseverance, of unexpected flowering, of beauty created from fragments. My daughter had once called my quilting a waste of time, but time, I had learned, reveals its own wisdom. And sometimes, the most meaningful victories are those that emerge slowly, stitch by careful stitch, from the patient work of hands guided by an undaunted heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.